In this tutorial, we are going to look into mouse selection of entities in Unity. So I hope that all of you have gone through a basic tutorial in Unity, which is roll a ball, and it's here, this one. If you have finished this tutorial, then I believe you have some basic knowledge about Unity and how to create scene, how to move an entity. Now, in this tutorial, we will look into how we can select an entity using a mouse. So here I have an empty game object called entity, and I have three entities, three cubes as three entity. Now we want to select any of this entity through mouse, and we want to show that we have selected entity by changing the material of the selected entity. To do that, in the beginning, first let's select an entity, which is this cube, and go to this tag in the inspector. Go to this tag, click on this. I have already created a tag by the name of pick. You can create a different tag if you like. To create a tag with different name, you can just click on add tag, click on this plus, and write, let's say write entity, and save. Now let's select the cube again, come back to the inspector, and in the tag click. Now you can select pick or entity, or you can have any other name. I have selected a name pick. This is the tag for this entity, which is here. Now I have duplicated this entity two times, cube 1 and cube 2, and you can see that cube 1 tag is already selected to pick, and also for cube 2 the tag is selected to pick. Now to select an entity through a script, we need to create a script, C# script called mouse selection. Now before you do anything, you need to have a list of entities similar to the Google assignments that you did earlier. You had a list of entities into your entity manager. Here I have a list of entities, and entity type is game object. Now in the start function, this void start function, I'm going to find how many entities are there with a tag name of pick. This object dot find game objects with tag, and then you can define here which is the tag. The tag I assign to each entity is pick. So I'm going to find all entities with the tag name of pick, and this is an array of that entity. Now once I have all the entities into this array called entities, I'm going to do a raycast very similar to the raycast we did in Google to find which entity to be selected. Now to do that, what we need is, first we have a variable hit of a type raycast hit. Next, what we check is whether we have pressed the button or not, whether we have pressed mouse button or not. And we can verify that with this input dot get mouse button down. If this is true, if you press a left button, that means this is the true. Next, what we will do is we will point a raycast on the plane to figure out what is the point of intersection of that raycast on a plane. To do that, we have this physics.raycast, and that takes two input argument. First is camera.main.screen points to ray, and that takes an input argument of mouse position. And the second argument is this out hit, that is the raycast hit. After this, we can find out what is the point of intersection of that raycast on the plane. So if we print hit dot point, this will give us a 3D point, which is basically the point of intersection of that raycast on the plane. Now, similar to the tutorial we did in the lab, once we know that what is the point of intersection, we can check is there any entity exist within a certain radius from the point of intersection. Now, to know that, we have to iterate over the list of entities. Now, in this entity, I have all entities stored. Now, I look for the distance from this point with all the other entities. Now, this for loop does that. Here we check what is the distance between the hit point and all the entities. Vector3.distance, that takes two argument, destination and the source. Let's say the source is hit dot point and destination is the position of entity, which is entity I dot transform dot position. If that distance is less than 1, that means from a point of intersection within a radius of 1, we have one entity. If the radius is less than 1, then what we do, we say that for that entity, which is game object, pick obj, which is an entity. We take that entity, access the mesh renderer of that entity, and change the material to a new material, which is selected matte. And if the distance is not less than 1, then we say pick object, that is the entity at index I, access the mesh render component, and assign the material a unselected matte. Now, selected matte and unselected matte, you have to define it. So on the top, I have defined it here. Public material selected matte. Selected matte has this type of material, and unselected map is a type of material. Now we have to provide these two inputs externally, and then we can assign these two inputs. Once we say, okay, we have found an entity within a certain radius from the point of intersection, or we did not found any entity within a certain radius from the point of intersection. Now we have to attach this script called mouse selection. Now let's go back to Unity editor, click on ground, and from add component you can type mouse selection, and from here you can select it. I have already selected, so I'm not going to select again. Now you see there is two input, one is selected mat, other is unselected mat. You need to have these two input materials. So in the material folder, I have created a material called selected unit. Now go back in select round, go back in inspector. On selected mat, click on this. Here you will find all the materials that you have. So I have this red colored material named selected unit. I select this, and in unselected material, click on this and select a default. The default is always white. What this means is if I run it and select an entity, the selected entity should appear in red color, and if I click on the plane somewhere else far away from the entities, that means any selected entity will be deselected and all the entities should have a default color that is white. Now let's check it. So here I have three entities. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. Let's select any one of them. Let's select the first one. Now the material of this selected entity is now red, which I have defined here. Let's select this one. Now when I click here, what the algorithm does, what the script does, it finds the point of intersection with this plane and then look for any entity within a radius of 1. If it finds an entity within a radius of 1, then it selects that entity and changes the material from white to red. And if it does not find any entity within a radius from the point of intersection, then all the entities material will be a default, which is white. Now let's click somewhere far. Let's click at this point, and all the entities should have a mesh, should have a material of color white. Let's see. So all this is now white. Let's click here, red. Let's click on other one. This becomes red and this becomes white. Let's click on this. This will become red, and other two will be white. Let's click far away from the entities, and all the entities will be white. Thank you.